You're listening to the No Bullshit Vegan Podcast, episode 198. Today I'm speaking with Thom Norman, co-founder of FarmKind, a nonprofit that helps end factory farming.
Welcome to the No Bullshit Vegan Podcast, myth-busting and evidence-based advice to help you kick butt with your health and fitness on a vegan diet. Here's your host, Karina Inkster.
Hey, welcome to the show. I'm Karina, your go-to no BS vegan fitness and nutrition coach. Thanks so much for tuning in today. If you happen to be looking for vegan strength coaching that does not involve celery juice cleanses or burpees till you barf, I have just the thing. Join our online coaching crew for personalized workouts, plant-based nutrition support, and zero tolerance for BS, especially diet culture BS. So whether you're training for a zombie apocalypse or you just want to deadlift your groceries, we've got you. Learn more and apply at karinainkster.com/coaching. That's karinainkster.com/coaching. Introducing my guest today, Thom Norman. Thom is the co-founder of FarmKind, a nonprofit that helps everyone, vegans and non-vegans, be a part of ending factory farming. They do this by working with experts to find some of the best charities to support and showing you just how much impact you can have for animals when you give through them to these charities. Thom's favorite vegan meal is his mother-in-law's gobi aloo, which is interesting because my absolute favorite Indian dish of all time is also gobi aloo. Here's our conversation. Hi, Thom. Thank you so much for speaking with me today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I know it's a bit late for you. You're all the way in the UK.
That's right. Yeah, it's about 9 in the evening, but I had a little nap on the sofa, so I'm all good.
Well, 9 p.m. is not the craziest time that I've spoken with people. There was one guy who booked in for a coaching call at 2 a.m. Berlin time. I'm like, you sure you want this? And he was totally cool with it. So.
Oh, wow. I did a podcast, a live podcast interview once at 2 in the morning.
Oh, good Lord.
It was like an hour and a half long, so it was like that was pretty crazy.
That's a bit intense. Well, thanks for joining me. I'm looking forward to hearing about the work that you do and kind of the reasoning behind it. But I want to get your story as a vegan first.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So the initial starting point for me was I was on a tube train in London, so an underground train in London with my now wife. And every sort of January, they have these posters that lots of sort of vegan charities put up, kind of trying to get people to think about animals and factory farming and things like this. And there was one of those in front of us, and you're on a train. There's not much to do. We were sort of talking about this poster, and I was saying, my partner was saying, probably think about this. This is obviously pretty bad. And I was like, of course, it's terrible that factory farming is of course wrong. We shouldn't be treating animals this badly. But the solution is clearly some sort of regulation or something like this. It's not for me to deal with this. And she was sort of probing a bit, and I remember getting really defensive, very quite frustrated. I was like, this is why are you talking to me about this? Let's move on. Let's talk about something else. And I think afterwards I had to reflect on why was it that I got so defensive in this conversation. And I guess I concluded that the reason was because that she was right and that I should be thinking about this more, and I didn't want to. And it's not like that was sort of a light bulb moment, but that was definitely the start of me kind of thinking, okay, well, maybe there's something in this. Maybe, in particular, I think regulation is important and we need better animal laws and protections for animals, but I can't do anything directly about that, right? But I can control my own behavior, what I do, and how I behave. And one way you can do that is obviously by becoming vegan. And so that was the sort of starting point for me thinking, okay, what can I do about this issue? Why, instead of just leaving it to everybody else or somebody else to deal with, what is it that I can contribute to the solution?
Interesting. I feel like that feeds into the nonprofit that you founded. I feel like it's not one or the other. We can individually take action, like you said. I mean, you made the decision to change your own diet. But we can also look at how we can impact systemic change and laws and regulations, etc., which is where I assume FarmKind, your nonprofit, comes in. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So FarmKind is, so I know your podcast is about evidence-based health and vegan health. We are all about evidence-based ways to help animals, really. So what we do is we work to find some of the best charities. We work with experts whose job it is to review charities, review their work out which ones are performing well, are making an impact for animals. We find some of the best charities. We recommend those charities to people. We do the calculations to work out exactly how many animals you can expect to help by donating, $10 or $50 or whatever to those charities. So you can see exactly what your money is doing and where it's going and how it's being used, and be really confident if you're donating to these charities that your donations are being used wisely and they are really helping animals. And we work on helping animals right now, improving the lives of factory farmed animals right now, the charities we support, and also building a future food system that is kinder, that doesn't involve factory farming, doesn't involve the exploitation of animals.
Mm-hmm. I do want to dive deeper into that because I think there's going to be some pushback in the ethical vegan world around any approach that isn't complete abolition. I'm not saying that's me. I'm just saying in general,
Yeah.
I've come across people, right? Anyway, so I do want to go down that route at some point. But I also know that you left a completely different career. You left a career as a lawyer, I think, if that's correct, to co-found this nonprofit. So how did that come about?
Yeah, I was a lawyer. Before this, I worked for the UK government as a lawyer on nuclear energy policy, which was really fun. I'm like one of the rare lawyers who actually thinks that being a lawyer is fun and interesting. But I really enjoyed it. But I wanted to try and do something that I felt was impactful and was going to really make a difference for animals. Since becoming a vegan, after that kind of fateful tube train ride, it really became one of the kind of main things that I really wanted to do something about. And in particular, as I learned about this thing, I went vegan, and I was like, but that's not, for me, that wasn't where I wanted it to stop. I wanted to do more than just change my diet. I wanted to actually do something proactive about this issue. And eventually I found out that, so the movement or the charities to try to protect animals, to try and build a better food system, has about $290 million globally in funding. The meat industry is worth $2 trillion. So you're trying to affect this massive industry with it. What is actually, I mean, obviously $290 million is a lot of money, but comparatively, it's a really small amount of money. Like compared to the environmental movement or any other kind of major kind of attempt for social change, it's actually a really small movement. What's amazing is we're still actually making progress and doing things, and we're having wins for animals, but there just simply isn't enough money for all the great projects out there. And one of the biggest things that's stopping this movement from being more impactful, from helping more animals, from helping to change our food system faster, is the lack of resources. So we started FarmKind to try to help with that, to say, like, okay, given that we don't have a lot of money, we need to really think about where we donate that money. And so let's find some really great charities, and let's try and encourage people to consider giving to those when they're thinking about their sort of the giving that they're doing in their lives.
Mm-hmm. Now, I've looked at the different charities that your organization supports, and I think Humane League was on there. We've had folks who have worked with and for the Humane League on the show before. Amazing organization. And there's other ones that work specifically for animal welfare within the food system. So like fish and shrimp, and there's a lot of things that are based on conditions in which these food animals are grown and killed, basically. So how do you marry these two ideas of being an ethical vegan and not supporting food agriculture, but also having these charities that, legitimately are impacting and making better existing conditions, but still promote animals as commodities?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And I think it's one that, I'm sure lots of people who are ethical vegans will be considering. So, like, as I said before, I think about our charities in kind of two buckets. One is the future food system. So we have some charities that are working to encourage plant-based eating, to encourage things like cultivated meat and alternative proteins, so that can replace animals entirely in the food system. But we also have these charities, as you say, that are working to improve the lives of animals right now. And there are two kind of main reasons for that. One is just fundamentally, there are 80 billion land animals in the food system right now globally, 10 billion in the US. 99% of those are in factory farms. There's a lot of animal suffering happening right now. And realistically, that is going to continue for at least, some number of years in the future. We're not going to change the food system overnight. And it matters what their lives are like, right? So THL is a really great example where they had amazing work to improve literally millions of chickens out of cages, and that means those animals are going from living their entire lives stuck in a space about the size of a piece of paper, completely unable to even open their wings, basically unable to move. And now their lives are not great, but they are not in a cage anymore. They are able to walk on softer ground. They're able to open their wings, and they're able to actually move around. And that is a really profound difference in the quality of their lives. Yes, we want to get to a world where they're not being exploited at all, but in the meantime, I think it does still matter how those animals are treated. And so that's one of the reasons we work with these charities. The other one is that if we look at like where we are right now in this sort of journey towards complete animal liberation, there's a long way to go, and we have to, if we try to sort of jump to the end and we try to sort of say, okay, well, all I'm going to do is advocate for everyone to sort of be vegan as individuals right now, we just don't have a lot of evidence that those kinds of interventions are really effective. And so we could waste a lot of time and money by trying to do that when many people are not really ready for that. And so what you often have to do in social movements is advocate for smaller steps to get people closer to the goal. And this is something that's happened in many social movements that we can look back in history, where the early arguments were not around the end goal. They were around something that kind of the rest of the population could accept. So a completely crazy example, which makes me feel really uncomfortable when I learned about this, but in the first arguments against the slave trade being made by British abolitionists were actually the conditions for the slavers themselves, because this was a really, really dangerous job for British sailors, and many of them died. And in fact, the captains of these ships were more interested in getting their slaves to the other end than they were the workers, because the slaves were their, in quotes, property that they would make money from, and the workers were a cost. So they didn't really mind if they died. And although it feels really horrible to think of, advocating for the end of this system on the basis of the welfare of some of the perpetrators, the original abolitionists felt they had to start there, because it was an argument that they could at least get listened to by their fellow people, and then they could move from there to other arguments. And there's a little bit of an analogy here, right, where we have to start with what can we actually do, what difference can we really make right now, given the system that we're in. And that can be, but that's part of a roadmap that gets us through to a much bigger end goal, which is the end of factory farming and the end of having to using animals in these ways.
Excellent. I think that's very well put. Yeah. So what I was mentioning before about like, let's go into what ethical vegans might think. I think it's similar to some of the work that the Humane League does, actually. I mean, you just mentioned the chicken example. So yeah, I mean, they're still working in an existing animal agriculture context, which is obviously not ideal, but they've affected millions of lives positively.
Exactly.
So I think it's kind of the same kind of idea, except you're doing this with multiple different charities.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. So other organizations that are kind of doing similar things to what the Humane League do, but for other animals as well. So whether that's like fish or pigs and things like this.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever worry? I'm not entirely sure if that's the right word, but let's use it anyway. Do you ever worry that folks who are donating see that as a substitute for personal change?
So this is a really interesting question. We actively talk to people who are non-vegans and say, like, look, you can donate whether you are, whatever your diet is like right now, right? Because I think there's some good evidence that there are many people who really care about animals, and they say they emotionally respond about factory farming, and they hate the way that animals are treated, but they aren't prepared right now to make some really big diet changes, right? And there is some evidence that if you kind of go to them and you start asking them to change the diet, they'll just sort of they kind of bounce off and they go away, and they there's cognitive dissonance, which can get people to change, but it can also get people to really shut down and put up the barriers and explain away the things that you're trying to tell them, right? And shut down their own ethical intuitions. And so what we really try to do is to get past that by moving the conversation away from diet for a second and focusing on this other thing, which is like, okay, here's something that's actually really easy for you to do. You can make a really big impact on a lot of animals for a really small donation. So, for example, we calculate that in terms of the amount of animal suffering that going vegan reduces, you can achieve effectively the same amount of suffering reduction by donating just $23 a month to the charities that we recommend. So, really small amounts of money can make really big differences. And one of the things we want to study, and we've been talking to some psychologists about this, is like, actually, can it work the other way around? So, like, if once you're taking one step, once you're doing something for the animals, and you're like, okay, yeah, obviously I agree because I'm donating, does that actually then become almost like a gateway into doing more? Because beliefs and actions can go both ways, right? You can, by changing your actions, that can actually start to affect your. I mean, you must know this as a coach, right? Like when you start to change your actions, it can feed onto your beliefs. And so we don't have a good evidence this is the case yet, but there are good sort of like theoretical reasons why it might be, and it's something we want to look into and see if this is true.
This reminds me of, I've mentioned it so many times on the show before. Listeners are probably rolling their eyes right now, but James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, one of my favorite books. And one of his ideas is that behavior change is identity change. So what you're saying is exactly this. Behavior change can work as identity change, or it works the other way around where you've changed your identity. Oh, you're someone who cares about animal ethics. You're a runner now. You're a weightlifter now. You're an author. Whatever that identity is, you then change your behavior to match that. But I agree with you. I think it works both ways. And it's almost like what people call a keystone habit. It's almost like a gateway, right? So it's something that then affects other habits. It doesn't just exist alone in a silo. So I think you're onto something with that. It would be neat to see some evidence. And, of course, you have processes for looking at evidence and how many animals are we helping and in what ways. But something like that would be very interesting.
Yeah, as I say, we've been talking to some psychologists, academics about this, and it's something we'd really like to test because I think it would be really exciting for veganism and for the animal movement more broadly if this turned out to be true. So it's definitely something we'd like to look into.
Nice. So let's talk about going vegan for a sec, because then I also want to go back to some of the wins that, concrete things that your organization has done and wins that you've had against the big meat movement. But on an individual level, obviously, in an ideal world, if we could wave a magic wand, the whole world would be vegan. But we know that's not realistic. We know that's not going to happen tomorrow or any day soon. But we also want to make sure that people know that it is important that if you have the means, if you're able to make these decisions, and not everyone is. I have said many times that being vegan is a privilege. I do believe that. I don't think it's accessible to every single human on Earth for many reasons, but that's a whole other conversation. Anyway, so people who have that option should go vegan. And you mentioned a little bit earlier that donating something like $23 a month essentially reduces suffering to the same extent as one person going vegan. And that is cool. We could probably measure that on some level. But I feel like there's a whole other level of going vegan, though, that isn't directly about animal suffering. Like, it normalizes in our culture a certain way of eating and a certain way of acting in line with our values, right? And it shifts the market in general to alternatives that are plant-based. And you never know, you might be influencing other people just by being vegan yourself. You've probably created other vegans in your lifetime of being vegan, even if you don't know, right? So it kind of sets these precedents, right?
Yeah.
So how does that all fit in with donating to charities?
There are two ways. So the first way, I think, is just simply to acknowledge that, as a vegan, there are some people I can maybe affect and help them to go vegan, but there are some people who are resistant, right? And and just are. It seems like right now, at least, they're just not going to change. Maybe they can't, or maybe they're just not going to. One of the cool things I can do with donating is actually to sort of like, if you like, offset their lack of veganism right now. So I could like my family members, I can be like, oh well, I can't. They're not really listening to me right now. But if I donate, sort of, if you like, on their behalf, at least I can kind of counteract the impact of their food choices right now, which is kind of exciting, because it means that you can get a bit more agency over the effects of other people, and you can double your own impact for animals, which is really nice. And then I think the other thing is, I think we have to also recognize as vegans that simply opting out of the system by stopping eating animals isn't on its own enough to make the change that we want, and we have to do a little bit more than that. If we can, not everyone can donate, not everyone has the resources to do that, but maybe some people have some time, or they can do simple things like, for example, joining. THL has a great program of people using their social media, using their email to pressure companies. And most people have a little bit of time to send an email or post something on their social media accounts promoting these campaigns, right? And these little things that we can all do, they actually help to make a difference, and to move the systems that are the real problem here in a more positive direction. And donating, I think, is probably one of the most impactful things you can do to affect the system. So veganism is a great step. It's making sure that you're sort of taking yourself out of that system. But if you then want to like go further and actually impact that system itself and start changing that on the kind of global scale, then probably the most impactful thing you can do is to donate.
Have you read Robert Cheek's latest book? I'm blanking on the name right now, but he also uses evidence on The Impactful Vegan. It just came.
Yes. Yeah.
So kind of the similar idea of, what do our actions actually lead to? What kind of impact are we having? Does the activism we think works actually work? Questions like that. It's kind of similar.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And these are really good questions to ask, because we can sometimes get an idea about what we think is effective and what we think is going to make difference. And if we don't actually then go and look in the same way that in health and fitness, you look for studies, you go and find out like actually what does really work, and how does the body work. And we have to like actually do RCTs, and we have to collect evidence. And it's the same when it comes to charitable interventions and helping animals. We have to actually go and do the studies and the tests and work out what is actually making a difference, and not simply work on what sounds good or what makes us feel good and things like this. Because the real way to make change is to look for evidence and to find the things that are really moving the needle.
I think what you said about making us feel good is huge, because to me, there are a lot of activist type actions that feel good for us, but we, and I'm using we as the general term for ethical vegans, often forget about how the message is received and how the message is delivered. And we only think about ourselves. Well, of course, we know this, whatever it is, standing on the street corner with slaughterhouse footage, etc. We know these things, but we're not really considering how it lands. And so I think it's an important piece of this whole conversation is, what are we putting out there? What's the method of delivering it? And how are people picking it up who aren't on the vegan scene yet?
Yeah, exactly. Which is so important, right? Because when we're doing any kind of communicating with non-vegans, they are the people who matter in that interaction, right? How they perceive it is way more important than what we intend, because we're looking for an outcome, which is for them to change their mind, to learn and to reconsider things. And so all that really matters there is like, how does it come across to them?
Mm-hmm. So tell me about some of the concrete wins that your organization has produced or helped to support against animal agriculture.
The way we work is, as I say, we recommend some charities. And so all the impact really is either done by those charities or the amazing people who donate through us. We're sort of just, if you like, we're a little bit of a middleman in there. So I wouldn't claim this for myself, but some of the stuff that these organizations have done that has been amazing. So I think one of the standout things, obviously, that some of you might know about is the Humane League raising the number of cage-free chickens from 4% in the US to 40% in the US, which is affect millions of birds. That took only about 15 years to achieve, and that is absolutely transformational change in the egg industry, which is amazing. They also have a campaign, the Better Chicken Commitment, which is a similar sort of approach, but for the chickens that use for meat, and that's also really exciting. We have another organization called Synergie Animal who do similar kind of campaigns. They also do encouraging plant-based eating in the global south, and this is really, really important because the places where animal agriculture is growing fastest and where industrial factory farming is growing fastest are in places like Asia, and almost all of the kind of animal charity work happens in America and in Northern Europe. So this is a really forgotten part of the world when it comes to this problem. There are things like, for example, in China, where they have these skyscraper pig farms and things like that. So really, like, there are almost no protections for animals in these places at all, and it's where it's growing fastest. And so Synergia have helped in the past couple of years. They've helped millions of pigs to not be in sow stalls, which is like confinement for mother pigs. To not have the baby pigs have things like their teeth removed without anesthetic. And this is, I think it's 28 million pigs that they've helped over the last few years. It's really big. And they've also helped some chickens as well, doing similar campaigns to THL. We have other charities like the Fish Welfare Initiative that work with fish farmers in India, in particular, and other parts of the world to try to improve the lives of their fish, because a lot of these farmers, they don't necessarily have the tools or the information that they need to raise the fish in any kind of sort of healthy way. And so they work to improve the water quality for these fish. They've helped millions of fish a year to have better lives, to have water that's like a little bit easier for them to swim in, that's cleaner, that they can, so well, that's their breath, right? That's their air. So having something that they can actually breathe and have a healthier life. And then we also work with, as I say, with organizations building the future of food. So Synergia do this, or a DVF is one of the charities that we recommend. They have done amazing work to unlock millions of euros for transitioning farmers away from animal agriculture and to plant-based agriculture. And the Good Food Institute, who've, again, around the world are campaigning constantly for the cultivated meat industry and these alternatives to animal agriculture, unlocking millions of dollars in investment from governments around the world, in making sure laws are improved, things like really simple things that I didn't even think about, but having halal organizations declare that cultivated meat is halal and is okay for religious people to eat, which is one of the problems that I hadn't until I heard about it. I was like, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, that's really, really important, right? Like for the world's Muslims to feel that they can eat this food as well. So these are some of the wins that our charities have been having, and they continue, every day to help more animals.
And it's a combination of changing the system and improving the current one.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. So tell me a little bit about how you look at a charity. So how do you know that a certain charity is effective, worthy of donations, etc.?
I think the key thing is there's a bit of a misassumption about how you do charity. So when most people think about like what makes a good charity, they think about overheads, right? That's the kind of classic thing. It's like, okay, I want my money not to go to overheads, and I want it to go to the actual programs. And this is not a very good way to assess charities for all kinds of reasons. You can be a charity that spends 99% of your money not on overheads and still achieve very little. So we have to look a bit deeper than just like how much is going on overheads and how much is going to the programs. And what we really focus on is you need financial transparency. So these charities are really good at saying, okay, we spent this amount of money and these are the outcomes that we achieved. And then what we want to look at is, okay, what are those outcomes and how much difference are they making for animals, and how much difference are they making for animals and how many animals are they affecting, right? And if we know that and we know how much they spent, we can work out essentially per dollar how much good can we do for the world. And this is a really good starting point. And there can be some other like extra benefits on top, but if we have a good kind of ratio of dollars to lives improved, this is a really good starting point for thinking about whether this is a good organization or not. And then there are some other, basic things like, is this a well-run organization? Are they doing all their, all the normal things that charity, kind of baseline stuff that charity needs to do? But fundamentally, we're focused on this question of like, okay, are you spending your money really wisely? So you're getting a lot of impact for the dollars that go in, which means that donors who donate to those charities are getting a lot of impact for their dollars.
Right. That makes sense. I appreciate that. Speaking of overhead and well-run charities, I saw on your website that you don't take any cuts from donations. So if these folks on your website are donating to either a fund that is distributed among all the charities or they choose specific ones, that goes directly to that charity and you're not taking any overhead. So, or a cut.
Yeah, that's right.
How does your nonprofit run then? I know there's some
Yeah.
philanthropy involved. You got to be making a living out of this. Like, what's the deal?
We are funded by philanthropic organizations. So basically, the kind of organizations that fund us, they would often give some of their money to some of these charities and things anyway. And so, like, okay, instead of us just like giving the money to those guys, why don't we give the money to FarmKind instead? And then FarmKind can go and use that to basically encourage way more people to donate to these charities. But the advantage of this model is that you as an individual, if you donate through us to these charities, your money isn't going on boring things like my salary or anything like this, but is going directly to helping in the animals, which we think is I think it's the sort of is a good level of transparency, and I think it feels better for people to know that their money is going directly to the animals, and so we like this system.
So you co-founded this. Who's the partner as your co-founder?
Yeah, so my co-founder is Aidan. He is a former consultant, and he also worked actually to help launch Uber Eats in Australia, because he's originally from Australia. So yeah, we are the team at the moment. So it's the two of us.
The power team. That's so cool. You seem like you've come a long way. You seem young. Can I ask how old you are?
I'm 33.
Yeah, you are young. I mean, I'm 38. I'm not that much older than you, but you've accomplished a lot. I'm very impressed. You've been a lawyer already. You've had a government job. You've started a nonprofit. That's amazing. I'm very impressed.
Oh, thank you.
Very cool. So if you could leave our listeners with something other than go to farmkind.giving and check out the website and donate, what would you leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I think, I guess the main thing I would say actually is a message of hope. I think that the issue of factory farming and the way that animals are treated, for those of us who really care about this, and can sometimes spend time like looking and finding out and not sort of shutting our eyes to it, can be really upsetting sometimes, and it can be really, it can really get you down because you see all this suffering. But the reality is, although that is true, although there is a lot of suffering going on, there are organizations out there who are doing really great work in actually making a difference every day on these issues. They are, as I say, things like these cage-free campaigns that are unlocking chickens from cages, treating all these animals better, building a future of food that's not about exploiting animals. And I'm really overall hopeful. I think the system of factory farming is broken and inefficient. It cannot survive. We simply can't feed everybody with the system, let alone anything else. And so I do think we are on a path to a better future for animals. The job for us now is to make that faster and speed that up. But I think ultimately we will end up in a good place. So yeah, I think that's
amazing. You know the term evidence-based hope? I think it's from Ellen Kelsey. I'm not 100% sure.
It's a good term. I've not heard it before. It's cool.
It's a good term, right? Yeah. So, and it goes along with what you're doing because you use evidence to support the work that you're doing and the types of charities that you work with. And I think it's just, keeps us doing our thing. It prevents hopelessness. It's easy to fall into that nowadays, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Like the world can sometimes feel a bit grim, but I think, when you sort of zoom out a little bit, actually there are a lot of good reasons to be hopeful, right? Like over the slightly longer term, in many ways, the world has gone better. It doesn't mean it will continue to do that, but there is actually like good reasons for hope, and there are a lot of people out there working really hard to try and make tomorrow better than today,
including yourself.
Including myself. Yeah, well, I'm trying anyway. Yeah.
Of course. Well, Thom, so great to speak with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We will have show notes where folks can directly access your website, and I really appreciate being able to speak with you. Thom, thanks again for joining me. Great to speak with you. Access our show notes at nobullshitvegan.com/198. And don't forget to check out karinainkster.com/coaching if you need a friendly fitness and nutrition kick in the butt. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Thanks for listening to the No Bullshit Vegan podcast at nobullshitvegan.com.